Welcome everybody to Digging for the Truth with Ark and Neo. This is our very first podcast together. I am Archaeologic from the hip-hop group Destiny Lab, and Neo is my brother who has an extensive background in biblical research and how it relates to many of the bizarre and interesting subjects that we discuss within our music. For those of you who have heard of Destiny Lab, tonight we're going to be discussing dinosaurs and dragons and some of the evidence that shows that many fantastical creatures described in our recent past as dragons could possibly have been dinosaurs. We hope to dig into many of these other fascinating subjects like this and future podcasts as well, and hope that people enjoy our discussions, and we'd love to hear from all of you and what you think and get some feedback. We thank you for tuning in and your support. And if you haven't heard of Destiny Lab and the music we make, we are coincidentally also a sponsor for this podcast. Are you a truth seeker? Do you like hip-hop? Are you interested in the mysteries of mankind and nature and asking all those life-examining questions and demand answers? Then it may be your destiny to check out Destiny Lab at destinylab.com, where you'll find music that glorifies God and exposes the very roots and the lies and deceptions that we face today. Issues like creation versus evolution, aliens and UFOs in the spirit realm, the fallen angels and the Nephilim, transhumanism, the New Age, the occult, the Illuminati and the New World Order, and how all these things tie into one cohesive story and one ancient plan that is explained in the Word of God. 3 CDs are currently available at DestinyLab.com. 54 songs in all for only $25. Stay tuned for our 4th album, which is in the works now, and please subscribe to our YouTube channel at youtube.com/DestinyLab. And consider giving a love offering to Michael Myers Video Ministry, who creates all of our amazing YouTube videos. And now, back to Digging for the Truth with Ark and Neo. Good evening, everybody. My name is Archaeologic, and with me tonight is Neo. This is Digging for the Truth with Ark and Neo. It's our very first podcast that we've put together. And tonight we're going to be talking about dinosaurs and dragons and the myths of and realities of these things in ancient times and the evidence that these things lived with mankind. And my brother is Neo, and he's got a lot of evidence about this stuff. He's kind of studied these things extensively. Our podcast is going to be going over all kinds of different discussions we're going to get into later on. Not only things connected to evolution and creation and dinosaurs and all that type of thing, but also transhumanism and aliens and UFOs, the Nephilim, all the types of things that people out there are kind of into that would be listening to this type of podcast. And I'm the MC for Destiny Lab as well, so those of you that listen to hip-hop music may be here because of that. So we're just happy you can join us here tonight. And Neo, thanks for being here with us tonight.
Thanks.
Glad we could get together here. Hopefully we can make this a long-term thing. So, like I said, we're going to try to talk about dinosaurs and dragons, and so, you know, give us a little a background a little bit first to kind of your study on this stuff.
Yeah. Well, it's been just like a lot of people, it's been a fascinating subject for me throughout my life, just to learn about dinosaurs, and it's always been fascinating about dragons. Hey, you've heard about those in history, and it always seemed, even as a little kid, that, you know, dinosaurs looked a lot like dragons, and even their descriptions. And even though from a young age you're taught that, oh no, you know, there was no such thing as dragons, but dinosaurs are here, but they lived 65 million years ago, and all these other things are just myths and figments of the imagination of people throughout the ages. But the evidence doesn't really point to that. The evidence points that man has lived with creatures that in times past were called dragons. I think a lot of people don't know, but the word dinosaur was actually not invented until 1841.
Yeah.
And before that, they mentioned that any creature that was dinosaur type as a dragon.
Yeah. I mean, what other word would they call it? I mean, if you were to ask anybody that, what word did they call, if they were to find, bones of a dinosaur, a giant T-Rex skull or whatever, what would they have called it back then? It would be a dragon.
They'd call it a dragon, yeah. And the other thing that, we kind of have a notion in our minds that all dragons are fire-breathing, they fly, and they're humongous. But in times past, when you do the studies, dragons, not all of them were big, and there was basically three different types. There was the land dragons, the water dragons, and the flying dragons. And they had all kinds of different sizes. Some of them up to 30 feet long, according to the science books of the past. What's sometimes called the bestiaries. And some of them were very small, only 2 or 3 feet long, but they were still considered a dragon.
And that goes along actually with what actually a lot of the evolutionists say about dinosaurs itself, is that, we assume most dinosaurs are these giant dinosaurs, but actually a lot of the dinosaurs that they find were, small, dog size, dinosaurs. So,
yeah, and there is actually a lot of evidence that points that there were dinosaurs with men. And there's actually been human remains that have been found in the same layers that they found dinosaur bones. Mm-hmm. In Utah, LaSalle, Utah, they found this is near Dinosaur National Monument. They found human skeletons near dinosaur bones. And this is in an open copper pit about 50 feet down. And that was one instance where they found actually human remains.
But of course, they're not going to say, wow, this is evidence that man lived with dinosaurs. They're going to say, this must be some sort of odd anomaly that mixed these things together somehow.
Yeah, it's interesting how they do that. It's I kind of think of after you hear all this evidence, I think you'll kind of see what we're saying. But it's almost like you see these little kids playing with these little toys that have 3 holes in them. That one of them's a circle, one of them's a square, and one of them's a triangle. And they've got to pick up the blocks and put it into the little toy, and only the right shape piece will fit. Well, evolutionists, they sometimes will only try to fit everything into one little hole. Instead of taking all the evidence and coming up with the best hypothesis to answer questions, they omit evidence, or they consider it, like you said, an anomaly, which is not really the scientific method that they're supposed to use.
Yeah.
Another guy named Dr. Javier Cabrera found a skull in one layer above dinosaurs, and there's evidence that says that the evolutionists actually conspired to steal this and remove it from the ground when this happened, which again was unfortunate. That they're so into their dogma that they won't allow any evidence that doesn't fit the mold of evolution.
Yeah.
And probably the most famous one is in Texas. There's in Paluxy River, Texas. There's prints, dozens of prints at Dinosaur Valley State Park, and there's human footprints with dinosaurs on the same layer. Some of the human prints are actually inside of dinosaur tracks. And very interesting story about this. You can still see them today, and these were made famous back in the 1940s when they were excavated by a guy named Roland T. Bird. And he excavated all kinds of dinosaur tracks for different museums. And most of them were sauropod tracks. And there was human footprints going in a right-left pattern, walking right alongside them, and sometimes right in the same tracks. And it's kind of laughable that the evolutionists claim that these are they're either carved, so someone deliberately put them there, or they're caused by erosion.
Yeah, I've seen videos. They've got new videos where they've actually gone out and disproven that by actually uncovering live on video new layers of it to show that they are right there as they uncover them. So,
yeah, both of those theories put together by the evolutionists have been disproved. Just like you said, that that's exactly what they did. They uncovered ground, and underneath the new ground was dinosaur tracks and human tracks going right along. And there was actually an incredible find where you can actually see all 5 toes of a human print with mud pushed up. So what that means, if the mud is pushed up higher than the other areas, it's not caused by erosion, because what they think is that the mud actually collapsed inside of the track to make it just look like a human print. But this one, the print went into the soft mud, and the mud came up higher right around the print, showing that it didn't have any erosion in it, and you can clearly see the 5 toes.
Wow.
And that's a pretty amazing found, and that disproves both the evolution explanations. So they just ignore it. Is literally what they've done.
Well, and what's crazy? I mean, you look at just the general history of all these different cultures that have dragons. I mean, every single culture worldwide throughout history has dragons. So I mean, it's like, where are they getting this reoccurring subject over and over and over and over again? And not only dragons, but the same types of dragons. Like the fire breathing dragon, or same attributes. Like the flying serpent and all these other certain things like that. There seems to be a common universal theme among all these different ancient cultures that they definitely had interaction with dragons. So that's tangible evidence that you would think would be part of the equation, but it's automatically just discounted as myth.
Yeah, and again, that's unfortunate that some people believe in those that they just discount all this history and all these stories from the past as somehow being myth, when they're not written as myth. They're written as facts. They're written as history. They're written as science from before. But they know best today is kind of their motto. They're the smart ones.
Yeah.
But one of the things to keep in mind too is that again, we got this picture of what a dragon is. A dragon, not all dragons fly or breathe fire. And another interesting information about this too is reptiles. Reptiles never stop growing, and so a reptile that lives 10 years is going to get maybe a couple feet long, but a reptile that lives 100 years could get 10 feet, 15 feet, even longer. And so under optimal conditions, creatures get humongous. And one of the things that you have to keep in mind is throughout history, anytime there's large creatures that are dangerous, they're hunted out. This has been seen even in the last 500 to 700 years with the giant birds of New Zealand, the moa bird, the elephant bird. Totally. Scientists back then, they said, "Oh no, those are just figments of your mind. There really wasn't 10, 12-foot birds that were over 1,000 pounds that could peck a guy's arm off. You're just a figment of your imagination," until they found evidence that they had just died out.
Yeah.
And they got huge because they had optimal conditions and they were never hunted by humans. Humans don't like to live around dangerous creatures that can kill their children.
Yeah,
so
really.
That's what I think. One of the things that happens is, as man spreads out over the earth and finds new areas, that these big creatures are destroyed and killed because they're dangerous.
Well, not only that, it seems to be, if you look at the things that are the legends associated to dragons, it's always connected to some hero going out there and slaying the dragon and killing it. So obviously there's this idea of, hunting these things down, whether it's to, free the maiden or, as a trophy or whatever, just to be the hero. I mean, so that's obviously within the folklore, and if it's within the folklore, it's connected to, reality. And we know today we go out there and hunt, giant animals, and people hang trophies on the wall. I mean, imagine having giant, dinosaur heads as trophies. I mean,
amazing. Yeah, and we kind of discount. Well, they couldn't have breathed fire or done these things, but we have reptiles today that can breathe acid and venom
Yeah.
on their victims, and their aim is unbelievably accurate. And some people believe that a dinosaur called the Hadrosaurus, because it had this extra chamber, one of the hypotheses is that extra chamber could have been a chamber that could have been a reactor where it could have breathed fire. There's really not any proof that that's the case, but they really have no idea what that extra chamber was for.
Well, if you look at the actual animals that even exist today, even by using evolutionary standards as to measure these things, you could say, okay, well, we got electric eels, we've got bombardier beetles, we've got animals that have venom sacs, and we have acid in our stomach. There's obviously all kinds of ways that within nature, whether designed by God or argued through the evolutionary standpoint, where the body can cordon off different chemicals or different acids or different things that would be toxic if put out in the rest of your body and used for specific purposes, at specific times. And I mean, that's completely believable that something like that could exist. And to discount that all these cultures would come up with this exact same theory seems kind of odd. I mean, there's got to be some sort of connection thing. Even if you argue that it's from myth, well, how are all these myths connected then? What's the common theme there?
Yeah, and another one of the interesting things is that you look at dragons in history and in books. There's a guy named Pliny the Elder, and he was from the 1st century, and he wrote the history of animals, and he had primarily creatures that are still alive today, but some of the creatures have died out, and he talked extensively about and other creatures that we consider today to be myth, but he considered them to be real creatures, and in fact, he described them in very specific detail on what they did. He couldn't have just made it up. He observed this. He claimed that this was from the learned man of his time. And in fact, he talked about in India produces the largest elephants and the largest dragons, and both are perpetually at war with each other. And the dragon is so enormous that is able to envelop an elephant in its coils. So what he's describing is a dragon that actually constricts. So, and it says that it even says what it does. It says the dragon will trick the elephant by waiting at a tree where on top of a tree where the elephants come by, and he'll go down from under the tree, trip the elephant by wrapping its coils around its legs. And then the elephant will try to bash it off by slamming it against rocks and other trees to try to rub the dragon off it. But he's basically talking about a gigantic constricting snake that was so enormous that it could actually kill an elephant. But in their day, that was considered a dragon. So that's kind of an amazing story, and he has many different stories of this same guy. And he's not the only one in history that talks about them in their books.
Yeah, and like those when they describe in those books, some of these animals that seem like people claim are fantastical myths, they're described right alongside other animals that we absolutely know are true, and nobody questions whether they exist or whatever. I mean, why would somebody who's giving a scientific analysis of his time of the different animals of his time just throw in made up things that anybody could discount, that read that and be like, why are you this is supposed to be a scientific bestiary, why are you throwing in all these made up myths? It just it's amazing.
Yeah. And we just talked about Pliny the Elder, and he also talked about the crocodile, and he described the crocodile with the same kind of accuracy and detail that he did the dragon. And he says it's the only creature that could hold its upper jaw up, and we know that that's true, that it holds its upper jaw up.
Yeah.
It looks like its eggs. It stays next to the river when it floods. It can stay on dry land. It allows birds to go in its mouth to clean its teeth. He goes into all kinds of detail about what crocodiles do.
Wow.
And yet we somehow think that when he talks about dragons, he's just making it up. It's not true. Even talks about that they can live 4 months in caves without food or water. We now know that crocodiles during the winter and the dry times can go into caves, go under the banks of the rivers for months at a time and just sit without. And that's what's allowed them to survive all of these years and not be flooded, because they can escape the elements and not have to feed for a long amount of time. And he describes that. And how would he know? He obviously was a very learned man and took detailed notes on these creatures. And there's no reason to believe that he didn't do the same with the dragons and the other crazy creatures that he describes.
Yeah. Well, and you think about ancient people. We always assume, or a lot of people assume, they were just didn't really know a lot of things. They didn't have a lot of knowledge. I mean, these guys were incredibly smart. I mean, you think about how long it's taken us to go from horse and buggy to having a car is only a couple hundred years. Who's to say, 1,000, 2,000 years ago, there wasn't a 200-year period, 400-year period where people, completely developed technologies just as advanced or more advanced than things that we have of today. And then that was all lost, and gone. It's, the world that was pre-flood, and as well of the fact that, look at, Egypt itself. I mean, they were around for thousands of years, gathering information and, had amazing knowledge of all these things like astronomy and all these things, just like the Aztecs and all these ancient cultures and Chinese. I mean, these guys were extremely advanced. And not only that, that's what they did, is observe nature, so they had their own facts that they gathered. They had the facts of thousands of years of observing nature, that could be added to that mix. I mean, I think they were much smarter than we give credit, for sure.
Well, yeah, they didn't have the internet to do a Google search to find information at their fingertips.
Yeah.
They had to go travel for years sometimes just to get to a different library that had one book.
Yeah.
That talked about some information that they wanted, and then they would put it all together. There was another book by a guy named Edward Topsell, published in 1658. Even more recent. This is, 1,600 years after Pliny the Elder, and he describes again dragons. His book is called History of Four-Footed Beasts and Serpents, and he goes into detail talking about dragons, serpents, different types of dragons and creatures, and again describes them in very great detail and speaks of them just matter-of-factly. He doesn't speak of them as a myth or a children's fairy tale, but as real creatures that are still learned, and he claims they were seen by learned men. They're not mythology.
Wow.
Yeah, some other evidence for dinosaurs in history is evidence that they're shown in pottery, maps, and in carvings. And I think we've all seen the ancient maps of the ancient world, and a lot of times they show these creatures in the water, on the land, and they're of dragons and sea creatures and all the types of things that we've talked about.
Yeah.
Today. And one of these is in England. It's called the Hereford Mappa Mundi, and it's a huge map printed on an animal skin, and it's still in amazing shape, and it's absolutely huge. It's one of the biggest maps of this type, and it shows several different creatures, and they dragon type creatures, and they correspond to some of the some of the stories and the legends of people slaying dragons in those areas.
Wow.
And so that's an interesting one.
Hmm.
And there's another one, and it's a cathedral. In the 15th century, there's a guy named Richard Bell, and when they buried him, they actually buried him inside of the church, and around his sarcophagus, he had brass engravings, and a lot of the engravings showed different animals of that time, but some of them showed sauropod dinosaurs, long-necked, long-tailed dinosaurs, and they've now come to be called Bishop Bell's brass behemoths. And you can see
say that 3 times fast.
Yeah. So, it's amazing that if what some of the evolutionists say is true, that they just found the bones and they somehow reconstructed these things. How would they know? I mean, how would they know that this thing was that big?
Yeah.
Had the long neck. I mean, it showed it exactly the way they're described today. So amazing. Unless he saw those, I don't know how he could have those carvings on there.
Yeah. Yeah. Exactly.
And there's many, just the same. There's a Roman mosque from 200 AD, same thing, 2 long-necked dinosaurs, long tails. There's lots of different things. Literally hundreds of different items and carvings and pottery and things like that.
Yeah, it's interesting. I've seen like where they're tangling their necks, like these. I've seen it on a sword, I think it is, where they have these dinosaurs kind of with their necks crossed, tangling each other, and then on another giant, looks like a vase, I think, from ancient China, and then another one that's a cylinder seal that when you roll it out, it has these necks entangling and these giant long tails of these, sauropod-looking dinosaurs. And I mean, if you watch for instance, 2 giraffes fight. I don't know if you've ever seen video of 2 giraffes fighting, but that's exactly what they do. I mean, they're like, that's the only weapon they got is these giant necks and the ends of their heads. Their heads just flying like a baseball bat. They're swinging it, with such force that it's just you can just hear the thud of it. It's amazing.
Well, you know that they've used their tails. That's been described in many of the stories we talked about, and I'm sure they use their heads, especially long neck, long tail. That's they don't have the big teeth like the T-Rex and other ones, but yeah, there's even a lot in the Americas. There's one that's kind of it's in Wapataki National Park. And there's a petroglyph, and this is only a few hundred years old, and this has been come to called Puff the Magic Dragon. And it actually shows a dragon with fire coming out of its nostrils. And again, how would Indians know? What would they be basing upon this? And this could be, from the 1700s, maybe even earlier, later than that. So pretty amazing. Arizona. In Havasupai Canyon, there's another dinosaur petroglyph that looks almost identical to what's called an Edmontosaurus. Black Dragon Cave, still called that to this day. It's called Black Dragon Cave, and it has pterodactyl petroglyphs there, and all very amazing. Probably the most amazing one that I've ever seen has just been recently discovered, and that's in Borneo, and in Cambodia. In Cambodia, they uncovered a temple called the Khmer Temple, and this was built, they believe, in around the 7th century A.D., and the dynasty ruled for almost 500 years, and another temple that was built in that area is called the Ta Prohm Temple. And on this temple, on one of the entryways to one of the areas is a carving of lots of different animals, and there's a very clear carving of a Stegosaurus. It has the ribbed back. It has the tail. and it has the short neck with some horns on it, and it's absolutely amazing. And what's absolutely crazy, it's so clear and precise in what it is that the evolutionists have just come up with absolutely wild explanations for this. One evolutionist even said it was a bird, and he said that the plumes like a bird, and it's a rhinoceros, but they just added plumes like a bird since they just wanted to decorate it up a little bit. I mean, absolutely
just
crazy.
Desperate.
Yeah, it is. It's just desperately trying to give an explanation for the obvious.
Now that's that one that's carved in stone in a temple, right? And it's in a circle. Is that the one you're talking about? It has plates on its back?
Yes,
yeah,
exactly.
That's amazing. I mean, that is just so clearly, a dinosaur. I mean, there's no other animal that has giant plates on its back like that. And yeah, I've read the same thing. I kind of going into some of these sites, and you'll hear them kind of trying to. What's really interesting is looking in the forums, like where people make comments, and you have all these evolutionists throwing out their own ideas, and they're saying, "Oh, those are bushes in the background," or the next person will say, no, that's actually a representation of a stegosaur, but it's just from finding the fossils, and that's how they knew." Yeah. And then another person will say, "No, it can't be a stegosaur because the head's, not long enough." And, I mean, it's just one thing after another.
Yeah, it's amazing that that evolutionists can't just do their science. They have to be full-time skeptics. Mm-hmm. They have to go out and try to give explanations for all the evidence that's against their hypothesis, and they're just desperately looking for ways to keep their sinking evolutionary boat afloat.
Yeah,
and it's just not gonna happen for much longer. I can envision the day where we'll look back and say, people really believe that we came from a rock.
Yeah.
That life came from a rock, and monkeys somehow turned into people, and
totally.
I mean, it's insane. There's no evidence. It doesn't make sense mathematically, genetically. There's just so many gaps in it. It's just crazy. And later we'll talk about the long ages and how, because they have to have the long ages. If they don't have the long ages, it falls apart, because we can test shorter ages. We know that it can't happen in a short amount of time. Mm-hmm. But anyway, there's a couple other really interesting things that are in pottery and in stones. Mm-hmm. There's a carving called the Milo Dumo dragon, and this shows a large snake eating a boy, and that was carved sometime around 1386. And again, why would they do that unless it really happened? They told their stories in books and codexes, and they told it in petroglyphs and carvings. That's how stories were written, and have people could walk by and say, "Hey, what is that, Dad?" And they would tell the story about, well, that's when this kid got eaten by this, this giant snake, which they called dragons back then.
Yeah.
Now we talked about North America, but South America. We talked about that Stegosaurus in Cambodia, but there are some unbelievable carvings that come out of Peru, and these are called the Ica stones. Mm-hmm. And there's literally thousands of these stones. One guy, Dr. Javier Cabrera, has been collecting them for decades. He has over 11,000 of these stones, and 3,000 of them, at least 3,000, depict dinosaurs on them. And all kinds of different dinosaurs in different, doing different things. They show Triceratops, T-Rexes, pterodactyls, sauropods. Some of them show people attacking the dinosaurs, killing them. Some of them show people riding the dinosaurs, which is very interesting. Some of them show the dinosaurs eating people. And they're still being excavated to this day. They're a black stone that is either etched or they're a relief where they carve out the background to leave it coming in. There's two different types. It's just absolutely amazing. And they find other items from that area too. I mean, pots and all kinds of other things that show dinosaurs. I mean, they're very clearly shown, and again, they called them dragons.
Yeah, I've seen some of the pottery and some of the things that are shaped, and done in these ancient type of techniques. The way that they use the glazes and the that you can tell the age of them. I mean, these aren't fakes, and there are fakes made. I mean, don't get me wrong. I think that in that area they have lots of, like you were saying before, like castings of real ones, or people that pawn off fake versions of them, but they're pretty easily detectable.
Yeah, a lot of these fakes are just made out of resin, and they, like I said, they're cast. They're just a piece of plastic that's got a carving in it, and that's sold to tourists and things like that. But they're literally excavating these out. They've been well documented, well tested to be thousands of years old. And there's, again, evolution of absolutely no explanation other than, they claim that they're fakes, but that's been proven wrong. They claim that they dug up bones and they're just drawing them from their imagination, which is crazy since they're showing them in so many different ways. It just doesn't match the style of what they did back then.
Yeah. Wow.
So those are a lot of the very interesting facts that are in pottery and carvings and on petroglyphs. Mm-hmm. And then there's lots of stories that have been told, oral traditions that we still hear about today. We still remember the stories about Gilgamesh, Beowulf, all these people that had different encounters with dragons. And we consider these myth or folklore, but most myth is rooted in some kind of story that was true in the past. Yeah. There's some that you may not have heard of either. Alexander the Great, when he conquered the world and when he went to India, his men were very frightened by dragons that hissed so loudly that they couldn't hardly stand, and they were living in caves, and they estimated the size of the dragons in those caves at over 100 feet long. Wow. And absolutely amazing. And again, these could have been a snake, because remember, dragons are flying. They could be land. They could be water. So who knows what they exactly were, but I know that Pliny talked about the giant dragons of India, and they were snakes that would act constricting snakes that would kill elephants. They were so large. And I think we talked about that earlier.
Yeah, they've got video and pictures of snakes eating antelope, and they've killed lots of people, eating them, swallow them whole. Yeah.
Now, there's a Scandinavian story about a dragon, and it said that it walked on its hind legs, and its hind legs were very powerful. It could leap unbelievably, had great leaping ability, and had very small front legs and gigantic jaws. And this sounds like a T-Rex to me, a T-Rex type dinosaur. And there is a lot of other dinosaurs that have this same basic shape. But here we go. We've got a story from the Middle Ages of a Scandinavian dragon that matches the description.
Yeah.
And then there's other ones that weren't as ferocious. In 10th century Ireland, they describe a dragon that had nails in its tail, and it would impale men with its tail. So it would sweep it around, and this sounds like some of the dinosaurs that had the spikes in its tail.
Yeah,
like the Stegosaurus. Also, it had the plumed crests on its back. Yeah. So they're accurately describing these type of creatures.
Hey, man, and what could those be confused with? What type of animal today has anything remotely like that?
There isn't anything.
Yeah, that's incredible.
France. A lot of people don't know this, but France has amazing dragon stories in it. One of them is from a place called Interlude, and what they did is that there was a dragon that was described as having a shell like a turtle, spikes on its tail, and a small head like a horse type head, and again it would use its tail to impale or bat people away, and they killed this, and it was called the Tarisk. And they renamed a town after this, and there's a statue in that town to this day that you can look at that is a huge statue of what this creature looked like.
Wow. That's amazing.
And a lot of people, you heard of Herodotus. Herodotus, he talked about flying dragons. And he said that in Egypt, there was so many flying dragons that there was actually bone piles of them of where they were killed by the edge of some canyons, and he wrote this in his books.
It's kind of amazing. You think about, after the flood, those dinosaurs they would be some of the first things hunted down. It's like, a few hundred years after that, especially as the population of the Earth grows, that's going to be the first thing to do is hunt these things down that are killing people and also for the sport and trophy of it.
Yeah, there is, and you bring up an excellent point. There's a well-known, fact of history that we see that whenever man moves into a new area, the first thing that they do is that they hunt out the big and dangerous animals. And as the population expanded, they came into new areas. They found ferocious creatures, and they didn't want to be eaten or their kids to be eaten, so they went out and they hunted these things, and only the things that could hide or could escape them or were afraid of man, which some of these creatures weren't. They tried to eat men, so they would fight it out, and eventually the men would win because they'd bring back reinforcements because they knew where they were at.
Yeah.
So that does happen, and that's what happened with the elephant bird and the moa bird. Those were hunted off to extinction, and these giant birds were deadly. They would stomp men down and peck at them, and sometimes dismember people with their beaks. Some of these were up to 12 feet tall and over 1,000 pounds. They were gigantic creatures, and the evolutionists in the turn of the century, in the early 1900s, thought that people were just making it up. With these stories from New Zealand and these other areas that had these giant birds, they said, no, there was no birds back then. You didn't see those things. And until, they found evidence that these things had just died off several hundred years ago.
Sure.
So they, again, didn't believe it, but science will eventually come around to the facts, and it just takes them a while. They're some of the last people to admit, which in some ways is good. They need to be skeptical, but when mounting evidence presses against you, eventually you have to account for that evidence. And
what's so interesting is how that we've proven beyond a shadow of a doubt that these animals that they think, like the coelacanth, that used to be, millions and millions of years old, actually, still exist, It's like, if you can find one of those animals, why is it so unbelievable to believe that you could find another one? Just because it looks like a dinosaur and that's, scary and a fish isn't? It makes no sense. At least as an honest scientist, you could at least say, hey, that is possible based upon the evidence, because evidence shows us this fish that we thought is millions of years old is still alive to this day, unchanged completely. So the evidence says that, yes, this is possible.
Well, that's a great point, because some people thought that the finding of the coelacanth would actually destroy evolution, and it really did. It really did. But they just revamped their theory. So, in other words, the coelacanth was what's called an index fossil, which means that anything they found next to coelacanth would be dated at however old they thought the coelacanth was, 65 million years old. And the problem with that is now that index fossil theory is completely out the door, because it could have been in any layer because it's still alive today.
Well, that just shows that it was in every single layer. If that's the case, even if it was millions of years, it's been in every single layer, and they have to admit that. They have to say, oh, yeah, well, even though we didn't find it, it's obviously been there. And that's just it. It's like, even if they create this index fossil layer, and put dates on it, that doesn't mean they know every single fossil that's in every layer all across the Earth. Just because they've never found it doesn't mean it's not there.
Yeah, well, that's it's actually even more disturbing that they haven't found any. That for 65 million years there wasn't a single coelacanth fossil made.
Yeah, which
means that their dating methods are probably wrong, but they won't admit to that or get into that. But
yeah,
I was going to get back to the Americas too. The Americas has a really interesting story from the Sioux Indians, and this creature might be still alive in America along the Texas and Mexico border. And what they saw in the Sioux Indian legends talk about a flying reptile that was called the Thunderbird. And what happened was during a big thunderstorm, they saw this gigantic winged creature be struck by lightning and it fell to the ground. So they looked for this thing for several days and they finally found it. And when they found it, they described it with great detail. They said it had large, leathery wings with claws on the wings, had a 20-foot plus wingspan, and a large beak and a large crest on its head. So they're accurately describing a pterodactyl.
Yeah.
Pterosaur of some sort. And what's even more interesting is that in the 1970s, there was a huge flap of people citing another creature like this. In 1976, 3 teachers saw a pterodactyl with a 15 to 20 foot wingspan, huge bony wings like bats. And in fact, it was seen by other people. It was seen by policemen, an engineer, and all the sightings were along the Rio Grande. And so here we are, only basically less than 40 years ago, we're seeing pterodactyl sightings in the Americas.
Wow.
And who knows if that, there's been other sites of giant eagle-type birds that up in Alaska. I mean, if you've ever flied a plane and looked down, if you fly anywhere up to Alaska and look into Canada and Alaska, it is just nothing for hundreds of miles. No roads.
Yeah.
You can't see the ground. It's just trees after trees after trees. Who knows what's in those areas? They're just, people think that scientists are everywhere. They got these zoologists just all over the world. Well, that's not true. They go out a few times a year in different places. They walk around the roads. They put out some cameras, but they don't get into the wild parts of the world. It's just too hard to get there and too expensive to do any research. And so, who knows what's in these areas?
Amazing.
Yeah, and we've talked about land and flying ones, but there's even some pretty amazing ones in the ocean, and we haven't talked a lot about those, but there's lots of stories, and many of them recent, of giant creatures being seen in the ocean. This is probably the place where we might find dragons still alive today in the oceans, because they're so unexplored and so remote. There's areas that we just don't go. We don't go with ships, because they're not the shipping lanes, and it's not good to travel in ships in this area because it takes too much fuel. There's areas where they have giant whirlpools, so no ships want to go in there. There's places where we just won't go with ships. And so who knows what's in these areas. But here's one story. There's a Navy ship. It's called the USS Stein. And it was tracking submarines near South America, and its sonar equipment suddenly stopped working. And so they went back to the Long Beach Naval Dockyard for repairs to figure out what was wrong with their sonar, because they couldn't find any submarines with that sonar. And when they got back, there was a big surprise. They found the rubber covering that protects the dome was torn and battered, and there was dozens of big gouges and hundreds of sharp, hollow teeth or claws that were broken off in the covering.
Wow.
And some were longer than an inch. So their explanation was this was an unknown creature. It wasn't from you think it might be from a squid, that some squid have kind of a claw type things, but they weren't shark teeth. It was something else, and we have no idea what it was. But that was an amazing story, and there again, physical evidence of that.
Well, and they found all kinds of exotic, weird creatures, especially, as they get deeper depths of the ocean. It's just, completely other world. And even as they, it also makes a difference as far as the temperatures, places where they think there's absolutely no life under these solar ice caps and whatnot, they're just finding all kinds of life as well, and so it's pretty amazing as to how many untapped areas and unknown areas there are, the whole Earth, and then also, inside the Earth even. I mean, who knows what actually exists.
Yeah, it is. It's amazing. The ocean could hold some unbelievable mysteries. And then in 1915 there was a British steamer that was carrying some cargo into the North Atlantic, and it was actually sunk by a U-28 torpedo. And the ship that sunk it, after it sunk in the explosion and it went into the water, they saw something else wriggling in the water that was alive but injured. And it was some type of creature that was in an area of 60 to 100 feet long. Wow. And they described certain things of it that were absolutely amazing. They said they only saw it for about 15 to 20 seconds, but it was about, like I said, about 60 to 100 feet long, and it was the shape of a crocodile. Whoa. But it had 4 limbs with powerful webbed feet on it, and a long tail tapered to a point.
Wow!
And so the only creature that there might be some other ones, but this kind of sounds like what is called a chronosaur, which is one of the most terrifying creatures that ever roamed the ocean.
Yeah, I've seen pictures of those.
And who knows? I mean, that could have been a chronosaur that they saw back in 1915.
Huh.
Some of them wash up on beaches. You think, dead bodies, they come up. So in 1925 in Monterey Bay, California, some type of creature washed up that had a 20-foot long neck. And the head, you can see pictures of this that are still available. It showed a head that looked kind of like a porpoise.
Oh, yeah, I've seen that.
Had teeth in it, but the neck was 20 feet long.
Yeah.
And some of them said, well, it was the evolutionists were some of the skeptics were saying that it was some kind of a whale with a 20-foot neck. I don't know. I don't think so. So anyway, that was kind of crazy.
Wow, yeah.
Another really interesting fact was of a massive creature that they brought up in 1977, and this is a Japanese fishing crew. And they make Japanese fishing boats. They really love fish, and they know their fish. They're very they have a lot of knowledge about the different types of fish in the ocean and what's edible and what isn't. But they were trolling, and they with their nets, and they picked up a carcass of a dead animal. And this was 32 feet long and weighed 4,000 pounds. It had a long neck, had 4 flippers, and looked identical to a plesiosaur. This boat had a marine biologist on board. He drew detailed drawings of it. He took tissue samples of it, counted vertebrae, and he said that this was a plesiosaur. That's how he identified it. And the skeptics, there's a guy out there named Glenn Cuban, and he's a full-time skeptic for the evolutionists, and he claimed that that this was a basking shark. And it is true that basking sharks, when they decay, their mouths kind of fly open, and they might look something similar to this. But the whole problem with this whole theory is that he completely disregards, number one, the eyewitness evidence of the marine biologist who is trained when he is
actual expert.
Skeptic. Yeah, he's the expert. He saw it, physically saw it, and took pictures of it. Again, you can see pictures of this. And the most damning evidence is the tissue samples. The tissue samples, they are not of a shark. They're of an unknown creature. So whatever it was, it's something that is completely unknown. It's not a basking shark. The tissue samples prove that, and he just ignores that evidence. He just says, well, it's a basking shark.
Yeah.
It couldn't be anything else. I mean, why? It's just unbelievable that, why would he fight it anyway? I mean, it seems like he'd be excited. If you're a person of science, you would be excited about new evidence, and you would test all the possibilities. But
well, that's what's funny about evolutionists, that often will say that, say, hey, we're not against creationists. If you were to find, a fossil that's, a human fossil within one of the Cambrian, layers, you would get the Nobel Prize. Like, yeah, right.
Yep. Well, what's interesting? Since they know their ship's sinking, they've actually come up with a new theory. They've now claimed it doesn't matter if the creationists or these cryptozoologists find a live T-Rex. Let's just say a live T-Rex is found and it's brought to the San Diego Zoo and everybody can see it. To them, that's not going to stop their belief in evolution. They will still hold there, but all they're going to say is, well, hey, that proves that evolution is true. This fantastic creature lived for 65 million years unchanged, and it just proves that evolution is true. And so they come up with a wild explanation because they know the evidence will come out and has came out.
No different than the coelacanth. I mean, the coelacanth didn't budge their views, and neither does soft tissue and animal tissue from dinosaur bones. They'll just say, oh, well, we obviously don't understand fossilization, and these things can remain unfossilized for millions and millions of years.
Oh, yeah. It's
really...
Yeah, it is unbelievable. And, lots of places have different stories. And you look at Australia. Australia has stories of the Aborigines, and they talk about, and they have drawings of a creature that looks like a plesiosaur, sort of long neck, flippers, and it shows pictures of them hunting it. They're all surrounding the lake, and inside of the belly is someone that it ate. And so, how would they know what it looked like? Why would they describe something in a fight and someone being swallowed if it didn't happen? Who knows? The evolutionists will say, well, it was just a story to tell their kids to keep them away from the lake or something. But they went to great lengths to do something like that.
Yeah.
Now, some evolutionists are a lot more open to the evidence, and they got to be real careful. Though there's a guy named Roy Mackal from the University of Chicago. So after he was tenured, he started to go on his expeditions to look for a fantastic creature which could still be out there, which the natives call Mokili Momimbe. And this is a living dinosaur, sauropod type dinosaur that could be and probably is still alive today. And this creature, the Mokili Momimbe, lives in the Lukalai swamp area in Congo. And this swamp is larger than the entire state of Georgia. And like I said, Mackal wouldn't have been allowed to go look for this creature if he wasn't tenured. But after he got tenured, he was able to go out there because, he wasn't going to lose his job like most of them would if they, went against the flow.
Sure, yeah.
So, and the evidence that he's found, he was able to find droppings, record sounds of this creature, and find prints. And the prints are amazing. They're about the size of an elephant, but they show 3 toes on it. And other researchers have also found these same prints. And again, evolutionists, they just claim that this is just a depression in the mud. This is nothing. What is this? And they just completely discount it when they have absolutely no expertise in prints and how it is, but they discount it because they know it can't be true because it would throw evidence against their belief system. But many people have went after this, and Dr. Mackal, he went several times, and he did something really interesting that I thought was a great thing to do for evidence. He went to the natives there, and he showed them pictures. And I think this is back in the 1970s when he did this. And he showed them, showed him animals that they had in their swamp. He said, "Oh, hippo." Oh, yeah, we got those. A crocodile. Yeah, we got those. Showed him a grizzly bear. No, don't know what that is. Mm-hmm. And they showed a picture of a sauropod dinosaur. Oh, yeah, Mokele Mumimbe. They said, yeah, there it is. And so they matter-of-factly identified a dinosaur picture is what he showed them, and they called that Mokele Mumimbe. Huh. And they describe its habitat, described what it does. In fact, he asked them, "Hey, have you guys ever killed one?" And said, "Yeah, about 60 years ago, the natives had killed one and ate it, but they got sick after eating it." Hmm. And so, this is a creature that lives with those people, but it's very rare. It's a nocturnal. It lives in the water, and it's afraid of man. It doesn't want to come around men. And I live in the state of Oregon, and we've got literally tens of thousands of mountain lions. There's probably one within a few square miles of me right now, and yet I spend hundreds of hours in the outdoors, fishing and hiking and things like that, and I've never seen one.
Yeah. Huh.
And I bet you hundreds of cougars have seen me. And so evolutionists also claim, well, we've got people all over the place. Why can't they find it? Well, they don't want to be found. They're nocturnal. Who goes out in the middle of the night? Who can see things at the night? You only see a few feet in front of you. Mm-hmm. Their senses are way up more heightened than ours. And so for us to think that we're going to find this creature, even if it is big, probably not going to find it. It's kind of like, if I ask you, okay, there's 25 elephants in the state of Georgia. Okay? Go out there in the middle of the night and try to find them.
Yeah.
How long would it take you to find them? How long would you'd probably go your whole life, you'd never see a single one of them.
Yeah, let alone the Congo.
Yeah, and the Congo is just, there's no roads here. Yeah. You have to travel by boat. The jungle is so dense that it's literally most of the place doesn't even have ground. You have to walk on root wads, and you basically have to crawl through these roots and different things. It's just it's absolutely horrendous to try to travel. You can usually, if you travel all day with no stops, it's 1 mile per day. Yeah, that's your speed.
Well, and I know, these people that are out there, I know you said before as well, they go their whole lives and have never seen one as well. A lot of them, it's very rare for even them who live there to see one, but many of them definitely have as well. So it's just one of those things, like you said, akin to like a mountain lion. Most people don't see a mountain lion, but if you hunt enough, you may run across one or two in your life or whatever. But it's a super, super rare thing. Majority of people, even though they live all around them, will never see one. Yeah,
it is. And there's lots of them. There's a small breeding population of this creature. They're definitely not as big as what they used to be. They're not 80 feet long. They're described as having the body the size of a hippo or a small elephant, with a neck and a tail, maybe 20 to maybe at the biggest 30 feet long if you went from tip of tail to the nose. Mm-hmm. But definitely a creature that we don't see much anymore here, or in the world. But it'd be an amazing discovery if someone could find one.
Yeah, well, and these people that live out in those areas, they don't understand necessarily. I doubt the cultural belief system and scientific views that evolutionists have, as far as these animals exist and these ones don't, and this was millions of years ago, and this one, they have no reason to lie or misunderstand or mislead. They're just basically telling it how it is. Like you said, they show them a picture of a grizzly bear, like, no, I've never seen one of those. And it's just a matter of a fact type of thing. There's no incentive and there's no reason to lie.
Yeah. Well, the evolutionists do claim they have evidence line. They say it's tourism.
Oh, yeah.
Which is kind of crazy. They don't.
Going
yeah, exactly. There's a tourist going there.
It's the next Disneyland.
Again, a crazy explanation, but people believe it. In fact, one evolutionist that I heard he said, well, if there was a Mokele Mumimbe, you should be able to find it on Google Earth. I went on Google Earth and I saw an elephant one time, and that's just as big as Mokili Mumimbe. And I was just laughing my head off when I heard that guy, but wow. He was stating it as a fact, and he was kind of laughing like we are that there could possibly be a Mokili Mumimbe, and he claims that there's hundreds of zoologists in that area, and I don't think that's true. Where are these hundreds of zoologists in the Congo Lukale swamp area? There isn't probably any. It's very rare when you do hear the expedition. It's well documented. You don't got these guys going around in that area like they claim, and they would find it. It's very difficult to find these creatures. In fact, there's hundreds of new animals found every year, and some of them are quite large. Mm-hmm. So to think that they know everything is really, pushing it.
Yep.
Now, so that's an interesting creature, the Mokili Mumimbe. But there's also there's other flying creatures which are seen in several different parts of the world that are smaller pterodactyl type creatures. One of them is called the Kongomodo in Kenya, and this thing eats dead flesh, and the people around there are frightened of them because they'll dig up graves and eat the flesh, and they only come out at night.
Creepy.
These have maybe a 10-foot wingspan, and a lot of these are described as having a ball on their tail, and which is there's a different type of flying creature that has the ball on its tail. And one of these was saw by a guy named Dwayne Hodges in 1944, and this one he saw in Papua New Guinea, described as color, long neck, crest, large beak. Another one in Venezuela by a guy named Adam Hutchinson. Zimbabwe has its own flying animal, which and again they call that the Kongomodo, and it calls it bat wings. Has described it has 4 to 7 foot wingspan. New Guinea, they call the one in New Guinea the Ropin. And the thing that's kind of interesting about those is some of those they believe have what's called a bioluminescence, and you actually see them at night because of what they eat, and who knows how that. But there's you got the fireflies and things like that. But these actually emit a glow, and they call that the Ropin.
Yeah, I've heard that. It's like the giant jelly, or the swarms of jellyfish that they show up in certain parts of the world, and some of that only happens also during very, unique times that certain tide or something that gets mixed in with that.
Could be mating even,
or something to that effect. Yeah, that only happens periodically. It's not something that happens all the time, and so. That's completely possible. I mean, every time you see these things within nature at one point, who's to say that can't be, duplicated or some version of something similar in another animal?
Yeah, we've talked about those animals that haven't been found, but let's talk a little bit about animals that we know exist right now. I mean, we have animals today which would be considered dragons by the ancient people. I mean, one of them is the Komodo dragon. The Komodo dragon, when the stories came back about the Komodo dragon, again, the scientists didn't believe it. This is back in 1910. The Western science says, oh, no, you didn't see those things. We know everything. There's no such. You were just seeing swamp gas, and the natives were just telling you stories, and that wasn't true. There's no such thing. We know about these. There's no such thing as a 10-foot dragon, and yet now we got Komodo dragons in zoos. They go up to 10, 12 feet long, 375, 400 pounds. I mean, they're humongous creatures.
Yeah. Well, and they've found evidence as well of giant lizards that lived before the Komodo dragons just in recent times. I mean, not that long ago, and they're, this is something that evolutionists themselves, claim is true. It's the Megalina presa or something like that. It's the 20 feet in length, over 1,000 pounds, and so that's twice the size of a Komodo dragon.
And that could eat a man.
Yeah, and this was even evolutionists believe this existed in Australia up until like 18,000 years ago. So that's not millions of years ago.
No, yeah, there's a few reports of large monitor lizard-type creatures that are in that range of 15 to 20 feet long, even in recent times. So in different parts of the world, in Africa, and so who knows? There could be some of these, but again, very rare, very isolated.
Mm-hmm.
Komodo dragon is actually very interesting too, because we talked about the breath weapons of dragons. They might be able to breathe fire. We have snakes which can spit venom to blind people. Komodo dragon has saliva that is so toxic with bacteria and virus that if you get bit or even scratched by one, you'll probably get gangrene. If it's not treated, you'll probably die. That's how they kill most of its prey. They'll just lash out and scratch it, get a little bit of saliva into the blood of this creature, and then they'll track it down. Because it'll die eventually within a couple of weeks, and they'll go and eat it. Komodo dragons can actually eat 80% of their body weight in one sitting. So a 100-pound Komodo could eat 80 pounds of flesh.
Wow.
180 pounds.
That's amazing.
They're all stomach. And in fact, scientists are actually studying the blood of the Komodo dragon to see if they can come up with a cure for AIDS, because Komodo dragons are immune to their own saliva. If they're bit by this, they don't get sick. They don't get bacteria or viral infections. And so there's something in the blood that is very amazing with these creatures.
Interesting.
There was even 2009, a new species of monitor was found, which they call the Varanus bitatawa, and this was found by Filipino tribal hunters, and it's a huge monitor lizard, which about 6 to 6.5 feet long, and it lives in the tree canopies almost exclusively. And that's why I didn't find it. It was always up in the trees. And they find a lot of new creatures up in here. So this is a huge, 6.5 foot lizard up in the trees eating eggs and birds and other things that find there. And pretty amazing animal. And I think we talked earlier about lizards and reptiles and how they never stop growing. If the conditions are right and a lizard can grow for, instead of only living 10 years, it could live 100 years, it could get to the proportions of a dinosaur. And if you ever look up a lizard called the Moloch horridus, it looks almost identical to an ankylosaurus. And it has spikes all over its body, it has a spiked tail, and it's only about 6 inches long. But imagine it at 20 feet long.
Yeah.
Type of creature that it could be. It could eat men. It has a large mouth. So it's absolutely amazing.
Sure. Huh.
And these are just the small ones. We have creatures today which are man-eaters. The crocodiles. Crocodiles, there was a recent one found. In fact, it's the Guinness Book of World Records for the largest crocodile ever taken to captivity, and they called this Lolong, and it was 20.24 feet long and weighed 2,370 pounds. And this was captured alive in the Philippines in a Bunawan township, and it killed several people, but they were able to capture it alive, and it is absolutely immense how big this crocodile is. And if that, you just look at it right now, and you're saying, that's a man-eater. That is a dragon.
Yeah.
Dragon in any time, and it's the size of a dinosaur today.
Well, especially when you look at these pictures of these things that are 20 feet long here that they've captured, and they've got a black and white picture online, supposedly from 1957, of a 30-foot one that they measured to be close to 10,000 pounds. These people, when you see them actually next to people, that's what really puts them in perspective. They literally do. They look like a dragon in a movie. It's like, it's so huge because you picture a crocodile similar to something like an alligator, maybe 10 feet long at the most, but this is just a whole nother level.
Yeah, and another story just came out of a kayaker that was trapped for 2 weeks because he was being stalked by an enormous crocodile, and he couldn't get off of this island. And he was actually a New Zealand tourist that was in Australia, in Western Australia, and boats were going by, and he's trying to flag him down. They're just waving at him. And he was stuck, he almost died of starvation because this crocodile would be coming at him. It was a manatee, and it was easily over 20 feet long, and he's finally rescued. But this guy would have been eaten by this crocodile if someone wouldn't have found him, and that was a kayaker. That was just recent.
A nightmare.
Probably the most famous crocodile could be still alive today, and this is a crocodile named Gustav, and this is a Nile crocodile. And usually Niles aren't as big as the saltwater crocs, but Gustav has been rumored to kill as many as 300 people, and it lives in the banks of the Rizuzi River on the north shores of Lake Tanganyika, and it's estimated that this is up to 25 feet long, and it's so big it has 6-inch teeth. 6-inch teeth on it.
Wow.
They have
That's
videos of this crocodile. You can see the videos. There's documentaries on it. There's even a movie called Primeval that's based on all the evidence surrounding this giant crocodile that has eaten people. They tried to capture. It broke out of a 4,000-pound trap, which they baited with live goats. And it got out of there somehow, just completely destroyed this huge barge. They said, "Oh, this is big enough." I mean, it was bigger. They made this trap to try to capture just this crocodile because they couldn't get it any other way, and it busted out of there somehow. So, and you can go online and see pictures. You can go to Netflix and watch the National Geographic documentary about Gustav. And again, he is a true dragon, and they've tried to get this creature and kill it because it's killing people. It got so big that it couldn't survive eating its natural prey, so it had to go to eating larger prey and more easily accessible prey, which is humans.
Yeah.
As they bathed or washed their clothes, it would come up and snatch them off the edges. In canoes, it would topple the canoes and eat them. Easy prey for it. It was eating hippopotamus.
This isn't like, off the wall type of ideas. I mean, this is documented science. I mean, you go to Google or go to
Wikipedia.
It shows it right there. It says 300 humans. I was looking at it earlier. It was talking all about it. It's exactly what this information is real stuff. So.
Yeah, so we have dragons alive today. You can, probably don't want to see it, because if you do see it, you're going to be frightened out of your mind. And they got even bigger in the past. So even today, with all the people we have in the world, we have some absolutely massive creatures which were called dragons in the past.
Well, and you put things in perspective of, say, fish. It's like, people catch a fish here and there that's a big fish, and a lot of these fish will be large fish that people catch will range in this same category. But every once in a while, people will run across a fish that's just outrageously, enormously huge. So if there's 20 and even 30-foot, crocodiles that have been seen, who's to say there isn't, some, 40-foot, 50-foot one somewhere that just, that isn't never been seen or it's just, that's just what we've seen, and that's not the limit.
Yeah, you give it the right conditions, who knows what's possible. I mean, and you bring up an interesting point, because there's actually there's a way that fish get immense, and it kind of ties in with what the Loch Ness Monster in Scotland, Nessie. There's fish that are called triploid fish, and a triploid fish lacks the gene to reproduce, and so they never have to spawn. And spawning, the act of reproduction for fish, takes unbelievable amounts of energy from their body, and most of the time they die from spawning. That's how most fish die. Mm-hmm. But every once in a while you get this triploid fish that doesn't spawn, and they get immense. And so you get this gigantism because all their energy is going into growth, and they never have to spawn, and they live longer lives. And that's when you see these humongous fish. There's rainbow trout. Everybody thinks, rainbow trout, they're 12, 16-inch fish is a big rainbow. Well, they've caught rainbow trout up to 40 pounds. I mean, absolutely huge trout.
That's ridiculous.
under the right conditions, fish and reptiles can get humongous because they never stop growing. So, yeah, and I'm not sure if there's a triploid type, genetic type anomaly in reptiles like there is in fish, but I know it's in eels, because that's what I think that they could be a possibility for Nessies. This is a giant eel, and that actually makes a lot of sense to me too, that this eel will go into the lake to follow the salmon that go in there.
Yeah.
And then it leaves. But they think this eel lives in the Sargasso Sea and spawns there, but they've never seen them spawn, so they don't really know their life cycle.
Mm-hmm.
And they believe that if some of them that don't spawn, that have this triploid issue, could get immense and could get in the 30 to 50 foot range.
Yeah, that makes sense. I mean, and I've seen, looking at so-called lake monsters, if you really watch a lot of those, a lot of times what it looks like is this undulating, slithering, eel-like motion, and it's not just the footage in the Loch Ness, but in other areas as well that I've seen a similar type of pattern like that looks more like a snake-like or eel-like creature.
Yeah, and most of the Nessie type creatures are on the 45th parallel in the northern hemisphere. So you got Lake Champlain monster, you've got Nessie, you've got Bessie, you've got another one in British Columbia, which has been again cited by Indians for hundreds of years, and it's described just like Nessie. And so these could be, and all these lakes are kind of similar. They have access to the ocean, they're very deep, and they have spawning runs of fish, which could explain why these giant eels, which if that's what they are, could get in there.
Sure.
And it actually makes a little more sense than a plesiosaur type fish, but it doesn't discount the plesiosaur that it couldn't be a plesiosaur, but could be a giant eel, which again would be amazing.
Yeah.
There's now we've kind of heard stories about anacondas.
Mm-hmm.
But you may not have heard some of the stories from the turn of the century. So anacondas, we've documented anacondas up to 35 feet long, and in fact, there's a story you can go see it on MSNBC, and this is back in I think it was about 5 years ago, if I remember right, and there was a reticulating python that was captured in the wild that was 49 feet long and 990 pounds. And this occurred in Jakarta, Indonesia. And apparently this snake was in a pit and being worshipped as a god by pygmies, and they would feed it dogs. They'd throw it in the pit and feed it dogs, and it was actually captured by the zoo, and it's on display in the zoo. It may be still alive today, but you can go on MSNBC, any of the major news stations, just look up 49-foot, 990-pound snake, and you'll find it, right now. So that was a pretty amazing find. Now, the pythons aren't as thick as the anaconda, but they get longer. But there are a few pictures out there of anacondas that have swallowed people and things like that. But there's an amazing story about a guy named Colonel Percy Fawcett. And he was an explorer that was commissioned by Britain to go explore South America, and so he was there to explore if there's any resources, explore the flora, the fauna, the animals, the people, what's there. And so when he went there, he had lots of people to dispose of it. He had artists, he had all kinds of people that could help him. And when they went there, he documented that they killed a 62-foot long anaconda. They shot it, killed it. They have a drawing of it that shows.
Okay, we're back here. I had a little glitch in the system there, so but we're back where we were. I think actually maybe a perfect timing here to play a little song about what we're talking about. We've got a song through Destiny Lab called "Remembered as Dragons," and it kind of goes into many of the issues we've been discussing tonight and what we're going to get into next, which is dinosaurs in the Bible. So let's take a listen right now to Remembered as Dragons by Destiny Lab.
From the days of old, unfold the dinosaur descriptions in the book of Job. Behold the king of all the beasts on the face of the globe. Pyrotechnically he bestowed, yet ferocious and bold. Stronger than King Kong, his eyes are red like dawn. Greater than Gorgon, a kraken, he's Leviathan. The water churns with a violent commotion. Upon inspection, his scales are laid in sections. Overlapping just like armor for defense and protection. He strikes fear and terror in the hearts of men. And if you battle him, you will not forget it. Never attempt to ever touch him again, or you'll regret it. His teeth are terrible, his jaws are very powerful. You cannot penetrate the skin of this animal. You'll never kill him with just slings and stones. Ineffective and strong on your spears and arrows. You cannot bring his nose, fire and steam from nostrils. If you jostle this colossal, then he might get hostile. We believe these proportions describe dinosaurs and interlude, such as Dinosaurs, as dragons and sound that we're holding recorded through time and cultures are haunted. Believe these proportions describe dinosaurs and interlude, such as Dinosaurs, as dragons and sound that we're holding recorded through time and cultures are haunted. Power and strength of behemoth, swinging his tail like a cedar log, head above the treetops. A herbivore who eats grass like an ox. He can never be caught. He lives in lakes and locks. Among the lotus plants and reasons where this monster rocks. Just another unknown, like the Yeti and Sasquatch. Bones like bronze, he's the chief of the ways of God. No one can threaten him or catch him off guard. Stone remains of these fabulous beasts, from Hercules to the dragon, chase a battle for the golden fleece. I know it's hard to conceive what ancient peoples believe, and every culture agrees, from the Greek to Chinese. Or feathered serpents with wings, the basilisk and the sphinx, the hydra, chimera, and the griffin and banshee. The dragons on the walls of Babylonian gates, plus all the legends ramble all about creatures and lakes. Giant squids with the eyes of dinner plates. What you think? Do you think they can all be fakes? We believe these proportions describe dinosaurs and interlude, such as Dinosaurs, as dragons and sound that we're holding recorded through time and cultures are haunted. Believe these proportions describe dinosaurs and interlude, such as Dinosaurs, as dragons and sound that we're holding recorded through time and cultures are haunted. So take your radiometric decay and your carbon 14 and just put it away. We won't be swayed from the truth by your nonsense. We will protest and request you change contents, and recognize that you built your claims on pretense, and admit that evolution is a myth of pseudoscience. Some scientists won't admit that being atheist could make them biased when interpreting the evidence. They think we're accidents, their intellect is arrogant. Many dismiss and neglect what is relevant, like the discovery of coelacanth, this living fossil in a fish market, torrent half the fossil record. Inconvenient for the seasoned professionals, like professors and professed intellectuals. Their observations gotta fit prevailing paradigms. A pair of pterodactyls probably when paralyzed wouldn't believe it if they saw it with their own eyes. Hypnotized like the Holy Bible prophesies. These proportions describe dinosaurs and interlude, such as Dinosaurs, as dragons and sound that we're holding recorded through time and cultures are haunted. Believe these proportions describe dinosaurs and interlude, such as Dinosaurs, as dragons and sound that we're holding recorded through time and cultures are haunted.
Alright, well, that was Remembered as Dragons by Destiny Lab. You can pick up all the music that we do through Destiny Lab at destinylab.com. So definitely, if you want to help support us and help what we're doing, that would be great. So this kind of segues into with what that song was talking about is and we've talked a lot tonight about dinosaurs and history and secular history and things like that. But what about the Bible? Let's talk about a little bit about the Bible and what the Bible has to say about dinosaurs. I know you've really studied that extensively, so what does the Bible exactly have to say about dinosaurs and dragons?
Yeah, well, remember that what we call dinosaurs today are the dragons of the past, and about 35 scriptures talk about dragons. And the Hebrew word for dragon is called tenin. And so if you do a word search, you can go to blueletterbible.com and do a word search for tenin. You'll find all the places where the word dragon is used. It's used in the creation. Dragons are part of the creation. The word tenin is translated many times as the great whales, but this is actually talking about the dragons. In fact, Moses, when Moses throws down his staff and it eats up the other snakes of the Janus and Jambres, the turns into is a tenin. It didn't turn into a great whale, so that's not the correct translation. It turned into a dragon. So I think that's pretty clear when you do your word searches.
Yeah.
So Jeremiah 51:33 talks about being swallowed by a great dragon and being thrown back up. I mean, why would it have that in there if that wasn't seen by someone that there were dragons big enough to swallow people and throw them up? There's probably one of the best descriptions of two different types of dinosaurs is found in the oldest book in the Bible, and that's the book of Job. Job, in Job 40 and Job 41, talks about two different types of dragons. One of them in Job 40 is called the behemoth, and this one talks about a extremely large creature that has feeds on grass like an ox. It has unbelievably strong legs. It has very powerful stomach muscles, which if you look at a sauropod dinosaur, that's what it has.
Yeah.
It says it has very large bones. It describes them as tubes of brass. And it has a tail like a cedar tree. And so this isn't an elephant. This isn't a hippo. Those both have very small tails. This is a sauropod dinosaur. It even describes where it lives in the fens or the swamps. And again, evolutionists, they claim that, and we now know that the sauropods they lived in the dry land. They walked around like elephants, and they used their long neck, the vegetation of the tall trees. But it's count a problem with large creatures, and that's their heat. They have to somehow release the heat from their body and regulate it. And elephants regulate it by having gigantic ears, which blood flows, and that acts as kind of a radiator. But the sauropods didn't have that. They had to stay in water to keep their core temperature cool enough, because of something that big, it's very hard to keep their temperature down. And again, they kind of make some wild speculation, even though it doesn't fit all the evidence, just to try to disprove evidence from in other places.
Yeah.
They don't need to do that. It's again, they're grasping at straws to keep their theory afloat. So behemoth is one of them. The other one is Job 41, and this talks about Leviathan. And Leviathan is a very fearsome creature. In fact, it's the fire-breathing dragon of the Bible. And somebody say, well, fire, that's kind of push it. That's into the realm of magic and all that kind of stuff. That couldn't be true, could it? Well, we talked earlier about that we already have creatures that can spit venom out of their mouth with very accurate ways with these spitting cobras. So we know that they could spit things out of their mouth that are volatile acids and corrosive. So it is possible that a creature could breathe fire by mixing chemicals and igniting them with their breath.
I mean, just the fact that it's such an unusual thing for all these different cultures to universally accept and come up with. I mean, that idea that would just be some sort of like coincidence or some sort of evolutionary vestigial fear that we have is just insane. I mean, it makes no sense that something so odd and obscure would actually be attached unless it was based in some sort of original truth.
Yeah, that's interesting point. We're going to talk about how it's described. We said that it was described in great deal. Leviathan, it takes and describes Leviathan in 34 verses, talking about how fearsome it is. It talks about that it has giant limbs. It says its mouth are like doors, and they're ringed all about with fearsome teeth. And the teeth are like spearheads. Spearheads are generally at that time about 6.5 inches long. It says it talks about its rows of shields, or in other words, its scales are tightly sealed together where nothing can get through them. Arrows. If an arrow hits him, it actually does no damage to him. Spears just bounce off him. It says it lives in the water, which is interesting, that this is a water creature. It says when it moves about, that the whole water boils with a froth as it moves, as it escapes. It says fire comes from its mouth and sparks shoot out, and it sets coals ablaze. Smoke comes out of its nostrils. So it's talking very specifically about what it has. So it has folds of its flesh are tightly joined and firm and immovable. Its chest is hard as a rock, like a lower millstone is what it calls it. It's unbelievably hard. And it says everybody's terrified of this creature. And there's no way that anybody can kill this thing. And so this is the most fearsome creature, and it calls this creature even arrogant. That it's arrogant in its because it knows nothing can hurt it, nothing can harm it. Men can try, but they're not going to hurt it. So the Bible goes into that whole story about this giant Leviathan. Now there's other places too that describe dragons. Another dragon is found only in the Catholic Bible, and that's in the book of Daniel. The book of Daniel has 2 extra chapters in the Apocrypha, and it has chapters 13 and 14, and it talks about a dragon that has a name. The name of this dragon is Bel. And interesting thing about this dragon, it's actually confirmed in recent discoveries. Back in 1887, a guy named Robert Coldaway stumbled across bricks, and they started excavating that area, and they uncovered the wall of Babylon. And along the wall were all these animals that were kind of decorating the walls. And they had all kinds of animals. They had lions, they had fierce bulls, and then they had a long-necked dragon, which they called the Sarush. And so you've got these real animals mixed in with what evolutionists call a fictitious or a mythological animal. And yet the Bible calls this dragon called Bel. Bel was apparently Nebuchadnezzar's pet, and he was actually worshipped by some of his magi as a god. And what happened was Daniel was put to a test again, like he'd been many times, and Daniel always comes out and talks. And Daniel actually killed Bel the dragon by feeding it, and this is interesting, tar and hair mixture. So he fed it this, and when they fed it, it apparently exploded. And so that kind of gives credence that this was a fire-breathing dragon as well. And tar ignited in its belly.
What an odd mixture to feed something that wasn't fire-breathing. Well, what would be the point of tar and hair? It just is, just for something for it to choke on, I guess. But I mean, you could come up with a variety of concoctions to do that. But why a flammable, source? And then to say that it exploded, I mean, that's, I don't know how much more confirmation you need.
No, and it talks about dragons inhabiting barren cities and haunting them and living in those different areas, and they're actually been named those areas. And One of the other interesting stories is about a smaller dragon, and they're called the fiery flying serpents. Mm-hmm. And these were the creatures which were sent to bite Moses and the Israelites as they wandered in the wilderness. Mm-hmm. And we still see this in our literature, in our symbols today, because God told Moses to make a serpent, put it upon a pole, and then anybody that licks upon that pole won't be killed by the venom of these fiery flying serpents. So apparently these things flew. They were a smaller creature, but very vicious. And they would kill people. Anyone that got bit, the venom was toxic and deadly. And in fact, Josephus speaks about these creatures. And Josephus was a historian who spoke extensively about all kinds of historical events. And he talks about what Moses did to kill these fiery flying serpents, because apparently they plagued them for quite a while. And what he did is he carried baskets that had ibis in them. And ibis are a bird which are a natural enemy to snakes, and in this case the flying snakes are the winged reptiles, and that's how Josephus describes them. He describes them as a winged reptile or a flying snake. And these ibis would fly out and devour the snakes from midair. And so I think that's very interesting that it would be in the history books about and with all these details about how they were able to handle these ferocious little devils.
Well, the flying serpent is one of the most reoccurring symbols throughout different cultures. The serpent in general, but then also, like you said, the detail of a flying serpent, which again, here's something that we don't see existing today. Yet it's attached to all these different cultures over and over and over again, whether it be Egyptian motifs with the flying serpent and the serpent and the coming out of the forehead that represents supposed knowledge, and the serpent in the garden giving supposed the deception of knowledge. All these things, it's always the carrot on the stick of knowledge. You can reach this level of understanding, or this level of being through the veneration of the serpent. And the Quetzalcoatl serpent of the Mayans, and he was the plumed serpent. And once again, a winged serpent or a feathery serpent. Some of the people that oftentimes have these DMT and ayahuasca journeys, tripping out on hallucinogens over and over again, tell these stories of serpent-type beings and feathered serpents and UFOs made out of snakes and feathers and serpents. I mean, it's just all kinds of the same repetitive ideas, and the snake who bites its tail. I mean, that's over and over and over again through all these different cultures and different time frames. That it seems like these symbols have been almost supernaturally inserted into our consciousness, and then also, a part of our reality as well, because, these flying things are actually shown in real things. I know I've talked about before about this woodcut I've saw of this guy who is a taxidermist, and it's like shown in a Scandinavian woodcut or something. And it's showing this guy have all these skins hanging on the wall and different heads, and then there's a serpent with wings on it hanging on the wall, along with all these other animals. I think it was an actual living creature that existed at some point.
Yeah, you're correct. The flying serpent is a repetitive thing. It's in a lot of the Oriental dragons that they are a flying serpent. If you look at them, they're very long and skinny with wings, but they can fly. Mm-hmm. The Quetzalcoatl, he told in South America, was the flying serpent, and kind of makes an interesting speculation about these little creatures. What happened to them? What did the ones that survived? Did they escape? Did they become the fire-breathing dragons? Because we know that they never stopped growing. They were apparently small at this time, and there's a whole bunch of them at that time. And what happened to them? I would suspect that they all didn't get killed, and they may have reproduced and gotten bigger, and who knows how long they lived. They lived 100 years, 200 years, 500 years, and got larger and plagued people throughout the world up until the Middle Ages.
Yeah.
So who knows? This is a very interesting subject that the Bible talks about with these fiery flying serpents.
Totally.
And the Bible actually even talks about, which is kind of a riddle to me of what it really means. It talks about in Isaiah 14:29 about the lineage or how these fiery flying serpents came into existence. And it to paraphrase, it basically says that out of a serpent's root will come what's called a cockatrice. And a cockatrice is a type of creature that kind of has maybe a hawk head about the size of a chicken, not very big, and kind of a reptilian type body, but it kind of looks like a cross between a chicken and a lizard. And that's a cockatrice, and it's apparently the cockatrice could spit venom, but this says, out of the cockatrice shall come out of the fruit of the cockatrice shall be the fiery flying serpent. So that's very interesting.
Yeah, it is.
That you would have a serpent, cockatrice, and then the fiery flying serpent. So those three things going together, and how they came about, could be, it almost speaks of, you talk about supernatural, that it could be a supernatural type existence. This creature is maybe even genetically created, and maybe in a future broadcast we can talk about genetic manipulation.
That's a whole nother podcast in itself, right there.
Yeah, but it could. Yeah, you never know. It's kind of a cryptic verse, but it's interesting. But it's kind of interesting of how Darwinists think and how they've kind of hidden this information and tried to censor it. In fact, Michael Cremo, he claims that there's a knowledge filter on any evidence against evolution, and if you don't go with the flow, you don't get tenured and you lose your job. Dr. McIntyre was banned from being an archaeologist for trying to tell the truth about evidence of men with dinosaurs.
Yeah.
Another guy named Juan Armeda, again, banned from becoming a professor because he found a spearhead next to a jawbone of a dinosaur, proving that man and dinosaurs lived together, and yet they don't want this evidence to come out. There's a deliberate censorship that comes out.
Well, time and time again, you'll hear about these people who are friends with, scientists, and you'll hear that over and over again, that the scientists behind the scenes will talk about this, like, hey, we know that evolution is definitely either completely wrong or it needs to be completely rewritten, but, we're not about to bring up that subject or challenge that because there's too many egos involved, and we don't want to lose our jobs. We're stuck in this for the long haul. So it's one of those things that is more about a political, egotistical driven system than it is oftentimes just facts and science. I mean, people don't understand it. Even if you present solid evidence like, flesh, unfossilized dinosaur bones and living coelacanth dinosaurs, it doesn't change anything to that paradigm. It just basically makes them say, oh, here's an anomaly that we didn't understand. Nothing has changed. It's just all the same, and they have a way of just filtering the information. Yeah, you said.
Yeah, and that is right. There's actually a technique that they filter it with, and it's based on their publishing. A lot of people say, "Well, I won't believe into this thing because it's not from a peer-reviewed published document." Well, you got to understand how this works. You can only get information published if you're part of a research establishment or a college. So if you're excluded from that for not believing their way, then you won't be part of that, and therefore you cannot get it peer-reviewed. So any evidence that doesn't fit their paradigm is automatically discounted.
Yeah.
It can't possibly be peer-reviewed. So peer-reviewed information is not necessarily the whole story. It's one side and one side only, which is really unfortunate, and it's not
ridiculous.
science.
I mean, because, as a creationist, you hear these stories of how much Christians are intimidated if they do try to get into the scientific realm and study these things. And if anyone finds out they're creationists, they're literally bullied and intimidated out of the class, and you're stuck to a situation where you're given a test and you basically have to answer the questions based upon the belief of evolution, because that's how you pass the class. I mean, you have to, even though you don't believe that, you have to answer the questions that agree with that in order to even become part of the club. So in that way, they can basically exclude anyone that isn't willing to either lie on those tests based on their own beliefs, or at least play the game, or somebody who is as an evolutionist and then later on through studying on their own becomes a creationist, which is how a lot of these guys have come to this conclusion. So
and unfortunately it's become a religion. It functions almost exactly like a religion.
Yep.
And it's called Darwinism. It's a religion of Darwinism, and Darwinism basically it has their own humanist manifesto, which is their creed.
Mm-hmm.
It has its own messiah figures, and they're basically say, well, we're going to evolve eventually to become gods. We are getting better and smarter, and come follow us, and we know all the ways of life. They have their own clergy. Those are the ones that preach the truth. And if you don't believe the truth, then you're they're their high priest. You're excluded from the club.
Mm-hmm.
And everything's based upon naturalistic thought. There is no supernatural. If it's not naturalistic, then it is completely discounted, which discounts a large majority of the evidence and eyewitness reports. And we're now knowing that from quantum physics that reality is much different than what naturalistic explanations account for.
Yeah. Well, that's you can go into a science forum and they'll allow you to talk about things such as the Bermuda Triangle and UFOs and Bigfoot, but the second you start talking about the Bible or creation or Nephilim or anything spiritual, then all of a sudden you're talking non-science, and so it's kind of a real big standard.
It's really a cult mentality too. It's kind of like the Rajneeshi that used to be here in Oregon, that they had a leader, and then all these people came in, and so all they did was talk to each other and pat each other on the back and tell them that. So they began to believe everything that was being said by discounting any other thought patterns, and they have created a club that basically they think everybody else is crazy because they don't believe in their way.
Brainwashed.
And apparently evolutionists have to recruit full-time skeptics to debunk all the mounting evidence against them. And one of these skeptics I mentioned before is this Glenn Cuban guy. And what's funny about his analysis, and he makes these lengthy papers to debunk every single thing that's against it, is he used the same technique over and over and over, and it's kind of hilarious in what he does. And so the first thing he does is that he basically prefaces everything by saying, it doesn't matter if this was true anyway. If the creationists or this thing was true, that they found a dinosaur, it wouldn't disprove evolution. So basically he starts it off by saying, it doesn't matter if this is true anyway, evolution is still true, even though it's evidence completely against it. Then the second thing is if it's artwork, for instance, he'll say, well, they just created this artwork from bones that they found. They didn't really see this dinosaur. There was just people that found bones, and they reconstructed them and drew these intricate drawings of them. Number two, he'll say, well, they're just hoaxes. They obviously are hoaxes. They didn't make it, even though the evidence says that they're old. He just says they're hoaxes, and he gives no evidence of why that's the case. The next thing is he'll say that they're ambiguous, even though kind of like the Stegosaurus in Cambodia, which is clearly a dinosaur. He just says, well, it's ambiguous. It's really just a bird. It was just a mixture of a rhinoceros and a bird, and they were just trying to decorate this rhinoceros up to make it look a little fancier. And the last step, after he's kind of been caught in his lie, he'll begin to name call, and he'll say stuff like, well, are you a student? You're not. Where did you get your where did you study? What, do you have a doctorate? So he'll just, instead of answering the question, he'll claim that you don't know anything. And if you look on on his skeptic pages, if he still has the questions and answers that he puts up there, it's always the same, and he'll always just claim that he's smart and you need to believe him, basically. And that's always what happens. This Glenn guy does. He'll resort to the name calling, and he'll have no answer. And what's even worse is he'll sometimes destroy evidence. I don't know if we talked about this before, about the Paluxy River in Texas, where there was human prints found with dinosaurs. There was the print that came out that they uncovered that showed 5 toes, and it was inside of another dinosaur print. And you could clearly see the toes. The mud was pushed up, and the evolutionists claimed that this was erosion marks, that it was really a bigger dinosaur's footprints, but the mud collapsed in to make it look like a human print. So if it was collapsed in, the mud would be lower where it collapsed in, but this mud was pushed up or raised above where the print, and you could see the 5 toes showing that there wasn't any erosion. So both these things disproved their only explanation for these human prints with dinosaurs. So what did Glenn do? He got on a plane the very next day, flew down to Paluxy River, was there with a crowbar, and destroyed the track. He admitted that he was there with a crowbar, was seen by eyewitnesses, but he said, oh no, I didn't destroy it. So he claimed someone else destroyed it, even though he was there with a crowbar, seen by several eyewitnesses, and he said, oh no, I wouldn't do that. And yet they have pictures of before and after he was there. Clearly, what he did is he completely destroyed all the toe marks there, but they still have the pictures there of what he did. And that's unfortunate. This guy is so fanatical in his religion of Darwinism that he would do anything for his high priests to keep them happy.
I mean, it's amazing. I mean, it's just, leading evolutionists have been quoted of saying that, like the only reason that we leapt at the idea of evolution is because the idea of a special creator was unacceptable and basically disagreed with our sexual mores, so it's like, we wanted to do what we wanted, and the idea of having a judgmental God is just not the reality we want to accept, so we created our own reality, and we all agreed to agree this was real, and the more that people that they can convince that that's true, the more they're justified, and pretty soon they forget that they ever made it up to begin with, and then it really is, just becomes their reality.
Yeah, if you tell a lie loud enough and long enough, people believe it, and that's what people have done. They've told this lie so many times that people believe it.
Yep.
And we talked earlier about the dating method, and what really would be the wooden stake in the heart of the evolutionist would be the long ages. And there's actually evidence of why the long ages aren't necessarily true. And so I wanted to talk a little bit about the dating methods and how they date these fossils, because most people don't realize how crazy the methods are of how they get their dates, these long dates, and how really unscientific they are. The first one they call relative dating, and relative dating is based on the reasoning that says that if you find something lower than in a lower layer in the earth, then it's older than something that's on top of it. And that makes sense that, hey, I can buy that. I don't know how much older it would be, but yeah, things that are lower would generally be older. And they admit that there's things called hydrologic sorting, which means that heavier objects, if they're deposited at the same time will automatically sort into layers, like we saw in Mount St. Helens. So they'll admit to that, but so that would be a relatively short amount of time. But relative dating is how they date most of the fossils, and yet it's based upon circular reasoning, because that doesn't give you a number. So how did they get the number of how old this 13th layer of limestone is?
Yeah.
Okay? So the way they do it is by doing this. And this is how they get the circular reasoning. They'll say, well, that 13th layer of limestone is 65 million years old because we found a dinosaur fossil in there that is 65 million years old. So you ask the question, well, why is that dinosaur fossil 65 million years old? Well, it's because it's in that layer, the 13th layer down. He goes, well, how'd you date the layer? By the fossil. Well, how'd you date the fossil? By the layer. So there's the circular reasoning. It doesn't even make sense.
Yeah, both groups think they have it figured out, but meanwhile, nobody's got it figured out. They just are, going back and forth.
And they'll admit to this. They'll say, yeah, it is circular reasoning. And how did they get these dates? They made it up. They made it up based upon the geologic column, based on guesses. They made guesses on how long they think it took for these animals to evolve to something different.
Yeah. And that was in the 1800s that they came up with that, right? The whole geologic column was made in the 1800s, and it's and things like the coelacanth obviously disproved the legitimacy.
Yeah, the whole thing. Yeah. So it is. It's absolutely crazy. So that whole dating method is really not scientific. It's just a circular reasoning pattern based upon guesses. So when people talk about that they know how old things are, they don't. It's a complete guess. It's not science. It's a guess based upon what they believe and what they want to be true, not based upon evidence.
Yeah.
Now, the second method, and let's go to something else. They also date things by carbon dating. Carbon-14 is a way to date things, but you can't get millions of years by dating things with carbon-14. You can only get thousands of years.
Yeah.
Carbon-14's half-life is too short to be measurable if it's more than only a few thousand years old. So anything that's dated with carbon-14 is relatively young.
Yeah, and
so keep that in mind.
What's sad is a lot of evolutionists, have no clue about that. I can't tell you how many evolutionists have said, they know these rocks are this old age by carbon dating. It's like they don't use carbon dating to date rocks. Sorry, I mean that's not how it works. You're misinformed, and
they're compartmentalized too. The scientists are so isolated from each other that they don't share information. To say, hey, look, what you're saying out here and claiming to your students is ridiculous. It's not science. And yet, since they just tell each other that they're saying the right thing, they're convinced that what they're saying is true, even though it isn't.
Well, it's like any other big production that gets taken on, whether it be a movie or creating some giant machine in NASA or something like that. Oftentimes these groups are so isolated, they're just given one specific task and they don't even know what the big picture is. They have no clue what the overall story is or what they're even making this product or mechanism for or whatever. And evolution works in kind of the same regard, and that, like you said, it's so compartmentalized that nobody takes a step back and looks at the big picture.
Yeah, exactly. So you can have confidence when you talk to these evolutionists and just ask them the hard question. Tell them to look it up. Tell them to look it up how these things are dated, and they'll find out for themselves. A lot of them become shocked that what you just told them is true, and they can't, and it caused them to question themselves. But some of them are so entrenched in their beliefs that they'll refuse despite all the evidence. And the Bible describes them in great detail too. It says that they're willingly ignorant, and that they're scoffers. In the end, they'll be scoffers, and they're willingly ignorant. So it's an act of the will. They have to try with all their might to ignore this evidence. And it's kind of amazing how prophetic the Bible is when describing these Darwinists. So that's the first method. That's called the relative dating. But they also use a method called absolute dating. And this uses other radioactive isotopes rather than carbon-14. See, carbon-14 is only present in things that were once alive, so it had to be a tree or an animal, but you can't date rocks which weren't alive with carbon-14, so you have to use something else. So potassium, there's other radioactive materials which they can use which have very long half-lives.
Mm-hmm.
But the problem with these with this method, this does give these millions of years. But there's something that a lot of people don't know, and that's the work of a guy named Barry Setterfield. And Barry Setterfield has done work on the speed of light. And the speed of light, he's shown, has been slowing down. And it's well documented. It's been in research papers, in physics papers, and it's pretty well established that the speed of light is not a constant. And in fact, if you calibrate, because the half-lives of things and the radioactive decay time is actually calculated based upon the speed of light. So if the speed of light was faster, things would decay faster. Mm-hmm. So in other words, you would get abnormally large ages that weren't necessarily, that aren't true dates, because the speed of light was a lot faster in the past. In fact, it wasn't linear; it's geometric. So it was much, much faster in the past. And so if you calibrate all these half-lives of these other items that have half-lives, these radioactive materials, and calibrate it based upon his curve that he's found, you'll find that it's under 10,000 years, which totally eliminates evolution as being possible, because evolutionists have to have the long amounts of time for all these creatures to change from a rock to a living organism.
Yeah. It's, this filter that they have to put everything through, this pre-existing filter that basically creates these dates and these ages, like you said, no different than the radioactive dating. Any type of decay is all based off of, information that they gather, now, and then they apply that toward forever, and they don't they don't put into the equation all the things, like I said, that could have changed or could be different, and completely throw off that scale. I mean, like you said, if time, or if light, which is something that's so fast right now, if it was, say, going 1,000,000 times faster, you wouldn't really recognize that or see a difference, because it's it's already instant. But how would that affect everything else? How would that affect time, and decay, and entropy, and who knows how different the world was at that time? And then there's also the thought of, it goes back to, like, when God created the world, there's a question: did Adam have a belly button? It's like Adam was never, in a womb, so he was created as a full man. He was never created as a baby that grew up. And the Bible seems to explain that the world was created in a state of, full form. It's not like it went through this slow process. It's like, so trees, for instance, in the Garden of Eden, did they have tree rings if you would have cut into them? Where there would have been tree rings in them? How does that throw off?
They didn't grow from seed, in other words.
Exactly.
They were just full-grown trees.
Exactly. There's no seasons to create those rings, and same with any other animal that was created at that time. No animal would have had, the attributes of being born, as far as, things like a belly button or anything else that's connected to that experience. Yeah. So, to think that we can measure everything based on what things are today, in comparison to speaking things into existence. And I mean, it's like, what was dirt like at that moment? If you started digging in the ground at the moment of creation, were there layers? Were there, was there sand? Was there dirt? Was there mud? Or was it all just solid rock? I mean, obviously, all that stuff, something, matter itself, was there. It was spoken to instant creation. were there round pebbles, or was everything just, jagged because there was no erosion to make things round? I mean, it's like all those questions come into play as far as actually putting yourself in that scenario and thinking really that if God is saying that he spoke things into being, he's actually speaking many of these things into being into full form. And so how much of that is also equivalent to the earth being put into full form, and that, many of these layers that we see may be just that. There's so many variables there of the unknown, It's hard to say exactly how it went down.
Yeah, what you're talking about, too, is what's called the concept of uniformitarianism, and that says that what we see today is the way it's always been. So if you measure, for instance, the deposits of sedimentation in a riverbed, then that's how it's always been. And so that's how one of the other ways that they've calibrated this fictitious geologic column is that they measured some stream in France and said, well, it's depositing a quarter of an inch per year, so that means since there's 400 feet of layers, that means it would have taken blah, 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 this much time. And so that's not necessarily true. We know by studying Mount St. Helens that it deposited 20 layers, 10 to 20 feet thick, in one day. There's all kinds of evidence that things were deposited very quickly by a massive worldwide flood. And for them to think that it happened slowly over time is ridiculous. The Grand Canyon wouldn't have sharp, straight down cliffs if it was carved over, a 10 million year period. The Grand Canyon was carved in one giant flood of something damming up, breaking through, carving through the soft stone, and leaving a canyon with ledges on it. Just think about it. Think about how things work and how they erode.
Yeah.
If it would have eroded, it would have been it would not be straight up and down cliffs like we see.
Yeah.
So,
well, it's oftentimes I don't understand the whole dating thing. I mean, it's like lava, molten lava, and I've asked this to evolutionists, and every time I get a different answer. They'll ask, "How old is molten lava?" And I've heard them say, "Oh, it's millions of years old. It's the Mother Earth's core," or other people will say, "Well, it's a vent horizon, it's called, and it resets everything, so it's 0 years old." And I've had, other people say, well, at the time of crystallization is when we start counting it as an age. And when it's molten, we don't have an age. We can't determine the age, And so there's all these different attempts to answer these questions. And then even if they say, well, it's millions of years old, then I'll say, well, what would happen if I dumped a truckload of rocks that were very young into it? Then how old is that lava?
Yeah.
Or vice versa, if they say, oh, it's no age, it's 0 years old, and I say, well, what if I dump, a truckload of million-year-old rocks in it? Then how old is the lava? It's like, age is so odd. The idea that we put an age on things. It's like, how old is water? How old is air? How old is matter itself? It's all the same age if you think about it. Matter on its own is all the same age as when it was spoken to being. We've just put labels as to categorize, time frames, but really it's just, recycled version of the same thing.
Well, and that's the kernel question of the whole thing too, is that, for instance, if you threw a quarter on the ground and it landed next to a rock, could you date that quarter based upon the rock that it was next to? Because that's what they're saying, that anything that's next to that rock has to be the age of the rock. No, I just threw the quarter down 2 seconds ago, and that quarter was minted in 1992 or whatever. So, the whole premise of how they date things based upon rocks around them is faulty anyway. So, really the only accurate method that they use today is the carbon-14, and again, it only goes back a few thousand years. And we know that has wildly different dates based upon some of the other factors. They can be contaminated very easily by living organisms and things being crystallized on them and different items like that. So, in fact, living seashells are sometimes dated at over 7,000 years old.
Yeah.
They're alive when they date them.
Yeah, I've seen that. Snail shells, seashells. Yeah.
So, really, the dating method, they have no idea. They really don't. There's a few ways to date things, but it's only from man's observation and man's history that you can really date anything.
Mm-hmm.
And we can only go back about 4,400 years with tree rings. And how long did the Bible say the flood was? 4,400 years ago.
Yeah.
So, everything points to history starting at the exact same time, abruptly after the flood, with unbelievable technology, and then it slowly got worse. And so,
the opposite
how could all
of
these
evolution.
things happen? Yeah, and then in fact, man got worse over the next few thousand years as it was right after the pre-flood. So, but again, those are probably other discussions of early man and what it was really like, and early technology, which is another very fascinating subject that we could get into sometime.
For sure. Yeah, no, it's incredible, all these different questions, and, dating and time and all those things are just, we think we've got it figured out, and we've constructed, science has constructed these paradigms that they fit things and try to slot things into, but it's like it's all based off of us here at this time right now. And you put yourself at any other time or even any other place in space in the galaxy. I mean, if you're standing on the surface of the sun compared to on the surface of the Earth, time is completely different. If you're moving through space a lot faster or a lot slower, time is going to change. I mean, all those things are variable upon how we measure those things, and to think everything is based off as us right now on Earth in this little planet, and that's how things are figured out and measured is just kind of incredible.
Yeah. A lot of them are very geocentric in their thinking, and very self-centered in their thinking too. That they know everything, and evidence against what they believe to be true is just wrong. And some evolutionists are going to listen to us, and they're just going to laugh and think that these guys are crazy. But I just challenge these evolutionists out there. Do some research on your own. Dig for it. Dig for the truth.
Yep.
Find out what's true. Many people have tried to disprove what we just talked about and turned from what they believe and gone to the truth, because God's word is always proven to be accurate. And you can scoff, you can be willingly ignorant, but eventually, if you give into reason and give into what the evidence suggests and says, you have to come to one conclusion, that there was a creator. He created it for a reason, and you're here for a reason. We're not here as for no reason. You die, and then that's it. Like a lot of them believe, meaningless existence. That's not the case.
Well, and there's lots of other reasons that we have the faith that we do that overflow with other things. There's a bigger story to all this information, and we've just touched on a little bit of it tonight. I mean, but there's so many more pieces of this puzzle and other evidences that have led us to these conclusions, and we hope to eventually we're going to definitely get into a lot of more of those things and bring more of these pieces of the puzzle together and dig for more truth, because that's what it's all about. Is we got to be willing to investigate, and ask the questions that demand answers. And a lot of times the church isn't willing to talk about these things, and as believers in the body of Christ, it's up to us to play that role and act as that extension to reach out to people that may be interested in these similar things, but may not be Christians, but they have an interest in dinosaurs and dragons. Well, hey, here's something we can talk about that'll hopefully lead them to investigate these things for themselves, like you were saying, and arrive at their own conclusions. And everybody's on their own journey, and we got to remember that it's not up to us to convince anybody that these things are true. God is seeking man out. The Holy Spirit draws people to Him. He will reveal Himself in a way that makes sense to you. So we just hope that people can draw some good information from what we talk about and ask questions.
Yeah, and you're right about the mainstream church doesn't believe the things that we do, but we've come to these conclusions, and it's because they hide behind a lot of truth. They're not willing to touch a lot of things that we are willing to talk about and confront. And the Bible is more mysterious and more confounding than they make it. Most churches, they have about 12 sermons that they preach over and over and over again for 40 straight years, and they never get into things on dragons or giants or things that we may get into in these podcasts and talk about. What does the Bible say? What does the evidence and the historical evidence say about these things? And is there a conspiracy, like we've seen in this, to cover this evidence up? And why would it be covered up? Yeah. And it kind of shows that there is a supernatural battle being going on, and there's people being influenced supernaturally, even though they don't believe in the supernatural. They're being controlled and manipulated by supernatural forces to not believe in the creator of the universe.
Yeah, and just as unfortunately as the church not being willing to talk about these things, the world is talking about these things from a secular point of view. So whether the church likes it or not, people are being exposed to all this stuff. Christian and non-Christian alike are being exposed to all these ideas of, ancient aliens and, evolution, Christianity being old and outdated, just this through the media and movies and everything else that we're exposed to. We're constantly bombarded with this anti-truth agenda. And so if the church, like I said, isn't willing to touch it, and people are still going to be exposed to it, then what other way are people going to have this information given but by places like this? And so, we just need to, as believers, be willing to talk about these things and be a link in the chain. Because there's lots of people in the secular world pointing out things maybe, but they're not oftentimes offering the solution. The guidebook to the supernatural is what the Bible is. That's really truly what it is the guidebook to the supernatural. And if people want to know about the supernatural, they want the supernatural explained, there it is. It's there for the taking. So we hope that people take the time to do so.
Yeah, be like the Bereans. Acts 17:11. Read that if you're a Christian and kind of a real skeptic about it. Be like the Bereans and search the scriptures to see if what we're saying is true. Don't believe Neo and Ark about all these things. Instead, find your own answers, and I think you'll come to the same conclusion we have after years of looking into this. And we've gone a long time, and there's many people that believe this, but most people just ignore it. But I think we need to have explanations for the skeptics out there and the non-believers, and have an explanation for all these things. And I think we've offered a lot of evidence to support our view. And it was fun tonight, and hopefully people will tune in next time for our next podcast. And I don't know what we want to talk about, but who knows? We'll talk about something that's going to be interesting.
Yep. There's lots of subjects that we want to tackle for sure, and for people that have listened to Destiny Labs music, kind of some of the things that we talk about. We're going to get into aliens and the Nephilim and transhumanism and the global flood and the end times and the Antichrist and the New Age, and then all these different things that we need to investigate and hope to get into. So glad you guys could join us tonight, and thank you, Neo, for being with me, and until next time.
Thanks for having me on.
You bet. We're going to close it out with another song by Destiny Lab, this one going into the serpent worship of 2012 in the Mayan calendar. Here is the song 2012 by Destiny Lab.
It's quite possible chakras are open. Return of the Anunnaki. The best argument 2012. Title is for a volcano, a volcanic eruption. Some refer to this as the New Age. They're going to see this. They're going to show us the way. Time approaches. We're drawing near. December 21st of 2012's been declared. Assigned as the date to prepare for the great global shift. A mental shift. The great awakening. Dimensional quickening. The end of duality depends on who you're asking. A brand new mentality. It's a whole new reality. Is it just me, or do you think it's all possibly a money-making novelty? Is followers embrace my prophecy, just so they can profit off their new age philosophies. Let's look logically into this mythology and where it all started, debunking the dishonesty. This serpent worshipping community was confused and tricked demonically. The Mayans studied the stars and the moon and skies. Mythology lives revolved around astrology, and chronologically they were taught by fallen angels, teaching them black magic theology. Through countless genealogies, they noted all anomalies following planetary oddities, secretly plotting to act like they have the power to control eclipses. Timing into the exact moment they pull beneath hearts out of living sacrificial victims to see mass hallucinations, hypnotic mind manipulations, sinister assemblies of shamans, high on psychoactive psychedelics, meddling peddlers akin to snake oil salesmen, peddling murderous ceremonial acts while wearing flamboyant masks and talismans, concocting potions that cause trances, acting out symbolic competitive chants and blasphemous wicked dances, practices passed down by inbred malevolent hypnotists, blood drinking bone-nosed benefactors with the instructed inheritors to ritualistically control the masses, continuing to this day misleading so many on their quest for answers, played out on the stages of the ancient blood-drenched rainforest, investigating hieroglyphs and presenting themselves as self-appointed specialists. More to this than money, there's a spiritual connection, a pattern that goes deeper. It's the spirit of deception. It seems in every culture serpent means are mentioned. Could it all just be coincidence or worthy of inspection? Still misleading to this day with diabolical intentions, inventing ways to change through time, going numerous directions, morphing the Kukulkan, Quetzalcoatl serpents into aliens, following the trail of the ancient snakes' evil scheme back to Eden. Nothing is new under the sun, and the system has been repeated, passing the king's office, ancient astronauts seated in rocket ships carved in rock in the lid of a sarcophagus. So many misinterpretations and imitations, pinning every evil act on the Bible and Christians, so they can remove the so-called morality and activate the next phase